Kevin, thanks a million for joining me, mate. How have you been?
Delighted. Thanks, John. No, it's no great. Thanks. It's a Friday, end of the week.
Absolutely, yeah. I just finished off the book there last night. Excellent, really good book. In general, I try to tell like individual people's stories. So most of the books I read and the people I interview, it's a lot more zoom in. It's it's kind of hyper focused. So it was really good to read a book where you took the complete opposite, where you zoomed out to the point of like of like 100-year kind of comparison. Tell us there to get us going. The name of the book. How did you come up with that, and where does it originate?
It's from a great quotation from Reginald Maudling, who was a very big figure in British politics in the 1960s, 1970s, former Chancellor, an opponent of Margaret Thatcher in her early days as well. But at the time in 1970, when Edward Heath became Prime Minister, he was Home Secretary. Of course, there was no Northern Ireland office or Northern Ireland Secretary at that point. So he took responsibility for particularly the security situation in Northern Ireland. And the tale goes that he'd had a fraught initial meeting with the leaders of the Ulster Unionists, who obviously ran Stormont at the time, and came back to the airport and said to an official, for God's sake, bring me a large Scotch. What a bloody awful country. And it's always struck me as, I mean, as well as being rather humorous, it just kind of also, it sort of says a lot in terms of the attitudes of British politicians about Northern Ireland and the whole issue. And I mean, what's got me interested in all this for very many years is just how events there just don't play over in Westminster, over in British politics. It's a faraway place of which we know and care very little, is the brutal truth of it. And I think nationalists would get that and say yes. And I suspect a lot of unionists privately would say that too, that actually this is a place where the British eye does not linger for very long, and that quote just kind of sums it up. So I thought it was the time of the centenary, and I thought, well, it's important to kind of capture some of this and as a bit of a balance sheet of where are we after a century of Northern Ireland's creation. It's not been a desperately successful 100 years, I think, to put it mildly. But I just thought that quotation from Maudling kind of summed up a kind of particularly a British political view of the place, and that's very much the kind of the tone of the book, where I've tried to write it really with that lens.
I know what you mean. If all this happened in like Scotland, we'll say,
okay, yeah,
it would be totally different thing, and even this kind of caught in the middleness that happens with the North. It almost happened the same way with history. I found that people, like a lot of people who were really into Irish history, would almost put that in a separate category to Irish history, and a lot of people who be into British history would almost put that in a separate category. So it kind of gets stuck caught in the middle, and then it doesn't get covered in a lot of ways.
I think that's absolutely true. It's kind of, Northern Ireland is betwixt and between. It's, as I say, out of sight, out of mind for Britain. Not least, of course, because it's across 35 miles of choppy sea. It's not a place British people particularly go to, and that's not to say that they shouldn't, and not to say that when they do think this is actually a rather nice place, but certainly in the period during the Troubles and before it was a place that people just didn't really go. And similarly, there's a kind of attitude, certainly in big chunks of the Irish political establishment, again, where they don't really want to think about this place too much. It remains unfinished business in Irish politics, and of course will always remain unfinished business. But there is a propensity in Dublin to kind of keep kicking that can down the road, and once that can has fallen to bits, having been kicked for 50 years, they just get a new can and kick that one down the road. So it is a kind of a place apart, both even though it's part of the United Kingdom, it's got associate status, and even though it's part of the island of Ireland, again, it's got associate status. Really, there's no urgency often with the Dublin politicians to do anything about it.
We'll get into this in a little bit, but you pointed out in the book, I think there was a quote about it. It was the temptation to avoid making tough decisions in a timely manner, and that's something that really plays a factor in the whole history of the state So I was
Yeah.
gonna just kind of kick us off. A kind of broad question, but answer it how you will. Um, the if you were explaining to someone who really kind of didn't know much about the situation or partition or any of that, how would you in kind of broad strokes, how would you go about explaining like what happened, how we ended up with this state called Northern Ireland? Some people call it the North of Ireland, whatever you want to call it. This is obviously a part of the island that
Mm.
going back hundreds and hundreds of years, there's been plenty of sectarian bloodshed. It's no stranger to it. Not all the time. In like concentrated times, we'll say. But no, it's an era that's no stranger to sectarian turmoil and violence. And so yeah, if you were if you were to explain to someone who really didn't know much about it, how was it that we ended up with this six-county state called Northern Ireland?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating tale of kind of, you know, political pragmatism might be too polite a term for how what we arrived at and the particular confection of a six-county statelet on the island of Ireland, but part of the United Kingdom. I mean, of course, those decades in the run up to kind of 1921, 1922. This is the British Empire at the kind of peak of its power, really. I mean, this is an empire that spans the globe, that there's so many people, rules so many people in so many places, and has done for quite a considerable point at that time. But here in Ireland, the writ of the British Empire is questioned and increasingly fails to run. And it's an extraordinary tale just to stand back at and sort of see how from the point of certainly 1916 and the Easter Rising, but a bit before that, and certainly in those years from 1916 to 1921. And I say in the book that there's often these pivot points in Irish history where there's long decades where not an awful lot happens, and then 4 or 5 years big dramatic things happen, and that's played out repeatedly in Irish history. But certainly to have the British Empire effectively kicked out of Ireland is an extraordinary thing, given the odds, and given the as I say, the absolute might and power of the British Empire to kind of pull out. And because it can't hold swathes of the country and can't hold the populace any longer, but then on its way out, feel the need to reward unionists, loyalists that have been there for the kind of 250 years about that point, by creating this back foot compromise, and then obviously negotiating the deal that then creates Northern Ireland as a as a kind of as a free state, and all the rest of it. But effectively, I mean, the optics are compelling. This is the British state pulling out of arguably its first colony, but in so doing, creating this kind of back foot compromise, which even if you were to look at it then, and you look at you look at the six-county state, and it's created obviously deliberately socially engineered to lock in a Protestant unionist hegemony. But there is no sense really, I think, with through the British political lens, that this thing is going to last. It's about managing a pretty difficult situation where there are a lot of rather aggrieved unionist people in the northeast of Ireland, that they're not abandoned. But I'm sure when you read accounts of British statesmen over the years, and you look at the actions even of people like Winston Churchill, even in the war years, quite happy to trade away Northern Ireland for a more general Irish acquiescence in the war effort. And then you look at the post-war era, where again, there's no real interest in Northern Ireland, which is so much of the problem that I say in the book, that this place from 1922 to 1972, so effectively from the creation of the Stormont system right through to it being prorogued after Bloody Sunday, you got 50 years where this place is run off the books. This place is not an integral part of the United Kingdom, and some unions may say to me, well, that's not the case. But the point is, in our sovereign parliament, questions about Northern Ireland could not be asked. And there are lots of particularly Labour MPs in the 1960s that, if you speak, having spoken to some, that would say, look, through family connections, you know what's going on in this place. You know it's not right. You see the nascent civil rights movement and the demands and the corruption and the cronyism of the Stormont system, and I can't challenge it even in the House of Commons, which seems extraordinary, because of course, Northern Ireland has got, we talk about metro mayors and devolution, and as though it's quite a relatively new thing. Northern Ireland for 50 years had its own prime minister, its own cabinet, a bicameral legislature, and pretty much did its own thing right there as at a corner of the United Kingdom, but not in a sense fully part of it, with the political system in Britain very keen to let it just run its own affairs, until the point, of course, where there's an absolute catastrophe building, and then British politicians being very slow to react. And as I say, one of the themes of British policy has been this kind of systematic underreaction to things that they should have reacted to, and then an overreaction to things where they should have shown a bit more discretion. And that's gone all the way through, from the 60s right the way through into fairly modern times. And we get so many avoidable mistakes and errors, better ways forward that were there, but often people not brave enough to take them. And that's been this so as a student of these things, to look at this and just look at it's an error strewn century where a better way forward was there if there'd have been more bravery, particularly from British politicians, more bravery and more assertiveness all the way through. But as I say, they didn't. For 50 years they let this place fester, and of course it got to the point where it was just not tenable for this to carry on any longer. And of course then when you try perfectly moderate and sensible and reasonable attempts to reform the system, not revolutionary reasons of trying to drag this thing down, but perfectly nice, reasonable civil rights demonstrations, which are bludgeoned off the streets by the state and their proxies in the loyalist paramilitaries. This thing just doesn't work, and my contention would be that it's never been built to work, and given it's not been built to work, it's not built to last either. And a creaking gate can last a long time, as they say, but eventually a creaking gate falls off its hinges. And that's the phase I think we're entering now in terms of Northern Ireland's longevity.
A friend of mine here in America asked me fairly recently. He was like before the outbreak of what we know as the Troubles. He said, "What was it a peaceful? Was Northern Ireland like a peaceful place to live?" And I said, you know what, like for the most part, yes. There was at the very beginning, you went into the book. There was like sectarian-based violence, and especially to do with workplaces and kicking out Catholics from certain workplaces. But then, in fairness, like almost anywhere in Ireland at the time, the following decades were, it was a very nice, peaceful place. Obviously Catholics were discriminated against in different ways, but like Protestant and Catholics kind of got on pretty well. Most plenty of mixed areas. It was, it was like anywhere in Ireland, very low murder rate and violence rate and stuff. And would it be correct to say that, like, you have the creation of the state and you have the Troubles here, and there was like kind of mass violence there, and mostly mostly peaceful, and then violence again? Would that be like broadly a good way to characterize it?
I think it is. I think it's a place that brooded between those points. So this is a place, born into absolutely terrible sectarian violence, particularly in Belfast at the start of partition. But then you get a state that is built that is, a very strong, rather oppressive state, and a state that's built in the interests of one side of a divided community, which is always a recipe for disaster ultimately. But yes, there are periods in that kind of post Second World War era until the mid 1960s where it's relatively quiet. It's benign rather than quiet, perhaps, but it's a system and a place where the flaws are very evident, and the kind of problems that were to then emerge in the late 1960s onwards were being heaped all the time because of the kind of rampant discrimination that took place, both state-sponsored discrimination and also discrimination the private sector as well. So you know, if you're a Catholic and you know you're openly discriminated against because of your name or the community you're from or whatever, all the kinds of issues that you know subsequently in Britain and elsewhere that have been made illegal in terms of equalities legislation. None of that, of course, is there at this point. So you know, Catholics are fine as long as they know their place. And of course, that's not a stable situation in any society. So you know, when there's a generation that have been to grammar school, that have been to university, and then they say, well, I'm not putting up with what my parents and grandparents put up with. We want better. That's the point where the system should say, right, okay, we've got to make allowances, we've got to make changes. And the point is, in Northern Ireland with the unionist establishment, they didn't make those changes. They didn't listen to those perfectly reasonable entreaties for reform. And as a result of that, the issue got behind them. And after that, you know, we were sucked into this vortex of violence very, very quickly. And from that, it's very difficult then to kind of pull us back into any semblance of normality.
Talk to us a bit about what would you, again, kind of a broad question, but like to you, what stand out most as the factors that led to the eventual kind of eruption of violence and then kind of 3 decades of it then?
I think it's from the mid-60s onwards, things are getting a bit more fraught. Loyalists would say that you know that the 50th commemoration of the Easter Rising was a concern for them. There's obviously still an IRA in the background. There's a border campaign blowing up electricity installations and the like from you know the mid 1950s to the early 1960s, but it's not got popular support. It doesn't really lead anywhere. But there's a culture of resistance clearly that's there, but it's not got, as I say, it's not got that purchase, it's not got that bite point within the Catholic nationalist community. But what does, I think, spill things out of control is the treatment of the civil rights movement, which you know in those days, and it's very important to say that you know this was a mixture of you know young Catholic nationalists, but lots of young Protestants as well, and a lot of the leading lights of the civil rights movement were liberal Protestants and you know who wanted to build a better society. And I think that was a point where you know politically, if you've got people that are challenging your system but are doing so to make reforms to it, you know, to kind of correct imbalances and injustices, then you need to engage with that. Any political system needs to engage with that and needs to find some accommodation with it, because you're dealing with people who by definition want to negotiate and have clear kinds of demands which are reasonable and eminently achievable, and you engage with it. Of course, what Stormont did was that it didn't agree to those demands. It you know it literally bludgeoned people off the streets, and it kind of sort of said that reformist politics is not going to work here. It's never going to work here. And you know you end up with you know who started the troubles and all those kinds of questions. But I mean, you know, rather than just, I mean, technically it was loyalists that did the first killings and all the rest of it. But I mean, clearly the community, the situation, the state is becoming volatile at this point, and you know it's at that point where you know the political establishment in Belfast at Stormont loses control, and you end up, of course, with the British government. This is then Harold Wilson's Labour government from the mid 1960s to 1970, sort of engaging and trying to put pressure on the unionist establishment to give ground and to make changes to, for example, very practical things about housing allocations, which was, you know, a system that was just completely abused. Northern Ireland was run as a patchwork quilt of very small little councils, the vast majority of them under unionist control, and you know the social housing allocations were completely rigged. I mean, it was just absolutely blatantly corrupt. You know, you could go on and on and on in terms of reciting, you know, the kind of abuses to the system, but this has been going on for years, and as I say, it's that generation after 1922 and their children perhaps after that have just been used to putting up with stuff, used to having second-class status, and this is classically a case where one community is in the ascendant and one community has got second-class status. and of course it's then perhaps their children that get to grammar schools, as I say, go to university, and are swept up in that kind of direct action kind of culture of the mid to late 60s. We shall overcome, and going on marches and placards and all the rest of it, probably wearing Sunday suits and ties and all the rest of it. These are people in any society. These are never the problem. These are the people giving a voice to something that needs fixing, and that's what didn't happen. And Westminster should have been alive to this much quicker and been much more assertive. Privately, you can see papers, and you can see reports in biographies and autobiographies of those Labour politicians at that time who did want to kind of press down and get Stormont to change and make changes. And of course, Terence O'Neill, who was the Unionist Prime Minister at the time, as liberal a figure as Ulster Unionism has ever produced, but he can't deliver the people behind him who don't want to make changes, who don't want to see their little world impacted by the people across the sea telling them what to do and all the rest of it. And of course, while you've got this political stasis, events on the streets are spinning out of control, and of course then you get the troops going in 69, ostensibly to defend the Catholic minority from sectarian attacks from loyalist gangs, particularly in Belfast. But of course they become very quickly an adjunct of the Unionist Orange State, and as that happens, they become, in the eyes of many Catholic nationalists, as an occupying army that are turned against them. And of course, from these kinds of decisions, you get the origins of the Troubles, and things move from that point very, very quickly, and we lose control of everything, to the point where Maudling makes his first visit as a new Home Secretary under Ted Heath's Conservative government from 1970, and of course is bamboozled by all of this, and what a bloody awful country this is, and at that point, that's at the start of the Troubles, and of course, a few years later, things are just infinitely worse. So it's this lack of political grip, I think, particularly from the Unionists, but then from a British government that needed to say, if you're part of our state, fellas, you need to run this place equitably, and you're going to have to make these changes, and you're going to have to do it very, very fast, because you should have done it a long time ago, and we're not having it. And that I think that's what needed to have been communicated, from the kind of mid 60s onwards, really, and it just wasn't.
Interesting. Okay, so one of these one of the questions around the Troubles as a topic is like, was it justified to take up like arms and violent means to go about achieving well, I guess United Ireland, but even equalities that they didn't have before. Just in your own opinion, given the way the civil rights movement was met with hostility and outright violence, do you think, like, as a natural outgrowth, do you think it's justified to take up like guerrilla military means, we'll say?
I mean, a lot of political scientists, if I can make that this point, I suppose, would say, when reformist options are not available, that then there's a question of what then becomes justified. I mean, I'd probably take the view that says, the point of constitutional politics is always to avoid these kinds of situations, and they are avoidable, and the Troubles was avoidable. And a simple canter through Irish history of the last couple of hundred years would tell you that there's always constitutional reformist periods when things are achieved, and then there's a point where, when they can't be achieved, that the emphasis then goes to what's euphemistically called the physical force tradition in Irish history, and that's explicitly what happened during this period. There's a chance here to do things constructively, and it's lost, because people are very angry. And I think particularly one of the real inflection points, of course, was Bloody Sunday in 72, where there's absolutely there's no explanation of it, never mind a justification. There's no explanation of it that makes any sense from the British side of the equation. It was just a slaughter. It was just a wretched day. It was a wretched decision, you know, and then of course the cover up comes after it and all the rest of it. So you know, what it sort of says to people in that period who are still trying to fly the flag of, you know, of kind of, you know, constitutional politics, is that there's no point. It doesn't work. You know, we march on the streets and then they start shooting at us and killing us. So what are we supposed to do after that? And you know, that kind of logic in a very fraught situation becomes almost impossible to argue against. You know, so there's a grim inevitability to the fact that you know, the troubles ramps up from that point onwards. You know, those years from, you know, even from 68, 69 through to 70, 72 or so, you know, just a blink of an eye, but so many mistakes were made. You know, but you know, a unit establishment that's not really interested in reform and has to be dragged to do it and react far too late, and a British government that doesn't really understand this place, doesn't understand what it's dealing with, and as a result of that, and as a result of this long period of neglect of Northern Ireland historically, doesn't make the right calls quickly enough, and head some of this off, and by which stage, you know, the place has gone up, and we've got the troubles, and we've got bombs. And we've got bombs on the streets of London. We've got you know, we've got, you know, daily reports on the news every night about a killing here and a bombing there, and all the rest of it. And then on it goes for decade after decade after decade. And you know, it's that sense that you know, as I say, if wiser heads had prevailed, and as I say, wiser heads really, you know, who's running this place, and ultimately who owns this place. Well, this is on Westminster, and it's on Stormont to have avoided all of this, and they didn't. And you know, so there's moral culpability on anybody who takes up arms for whatever reason, but there's also moral culpability on the people who, through their actions and inactions, and as I say, their overreactions and underreactions, have misgoverned this place to such a degree that violence becomes sadly inexorable.
I was going to say on the Bloody Sunday note, like, once there's like there's kind of senseless killings like that, I'm not saying Bloody Sunday was like some big accident, but let's say it was like a completely innocent accident, which I don't think it is or anything. Once that happens, you now have a population of people who, even if they didn't particularly care about a united Ireland or even civil rights or anything, they now have a very strong reason to get involved, and they have an enemy. The Bloody Sunday acted as one of the biggest recruiting tools during the Troubles for the IRA. I mean, obviously the year before, Ballymurphy as well, kind of similar thing. Falls Road curfew acted as another isolating and alienating thing for the Catholics in terms of their view of the British Army. Yeah, there was you could almost kind of draw you could draw parallels with 1916 and executing the leaders. It's like you'd have to imagine, like, if they didn't do that, you know, you could kind of question whether the War of Independence would have happened at all, or would have been half as strong, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point, because lots of people, even through dramatic periods of history, are quite happy to kind of sit this one out, and lots of people are not desperately political, and you know, but when history comes and knocks on your door, or perhaps more appropriately, when British soldiers bash through your door and drag your husband and your kids onto the streets by the hair and beat them up on the streets, you know, that's when people get involved, and this is classically what happened in Northern Ireland. And one of the most obvious things that strikes me, you know, when I go and when I study these things, is the thing that seemed to have escaped British policymakers and British Army generals in that period, is because of very large families. Lots of people are related to each other. Lots of people have cousins, and you know, West Belfast, Derry, these are places that are very, very socially integrated, and everybody knows everybody, and everyone's related to everybody. So you know, when you shoot my cousin and I have to go to his funeral, you've not just aggrieved that immediate family, you've directly connected that to everyone else. And of course, this is classically what happens. You know, the kind of numbers of people who are brought into the conflict just grows exponentially with every single thing that goes wrong. And you know, again, that's just something that just seems to have just completely escaped policymakers in Whitehall and you know in the army as well, looking at this situation, thinking how you can handle and contain this. All you are doing is electrifying an entire community, many of whom would not in a million years have got involved with anything. They would have been, you know, they would have just ordinary working class people in a city that's not dissimilar to lots of British cities or Irish cities. They would have just gone on with it. But all these people suddenly are electrified by what's happening to them because, as I say, history has knocked on their door. And as a result of that, you know, you've got you know hundreds of thousands of very, very motivated people. They're not motivated necessarily to take up arms and be overt, but these are people who are now part of a resistance against you. And you know, as I say, it's just extraordinary the kind of dunderheadedness, to put it mildly, of British policymakers in these periods where you think that there's a military way of cracking down, and if you crack down, you'll sort this problem out. You won't. It will, like water, it will just run through your hands, and that's exactly what happened. And you know, it's not unsurprising that, you know, this kind of this bloody century in Ireland has inspired, you know, so many other liberation movements around the world and impacted on so much global history, whether that's, you know, the Russian Revolution of 1917 right the way through to the rise of the Viet Cong. They've all been infused with you know the guerrilla tactics of you know of Irish Republican groups and that kind of anti-colonial thinking. So you know, it's been a disaster this whole period. And as I say, my personal frustrations and you know, just again that lack of political deftness and courage that could have averted things at various points. And you know, to say, you know, there have been at various points good people that have tried to, you know, particularly during the course of the Troubles, politicians that have tried to approach things afresh. But again, it's just getting that buy-in and you know that you know, to have a change of direction that they've struggled to do. You know, there have been good secretaries of state across different political parties that have tried to make a difference and often marginally have done, but fundamentally you're dealing with bad policy that's in a very bad place because of very bad decisions that many of which were avoidable.
There's a fella who features very heavily in the book, Ian Paisley. For one man, he certainly had like an extraordinarily outsized kind of influence on the whole thing. I think it's very fair to characterize him as an agitator, and in my opinion, you know, an overall, objectively speaking, kind of a negative force through this whole thing. You might, so just in examining Paisley, where would you say he deserves the most criticism, and if anywhere, where would you offer praise, if you would?
I mean, I think Paisley was an absolutely malignant influence in those decades, from emerging in the mid 1950s through the 60s, through the 70s, through the 80s, you know, through most of the 90s as well. And of course then he kind of has a change of heart as an older man once he's supplanted the Ulster Unionist Party and then does this sort of extraordinary deal that he ends up as First Minister to Martin McGuinness's Deputy First Minister. And you know, at that point, a lot of people will give Paisley credit and say he came in from the cold and delivered the DUP, and we had some stability from, you know, for a few years when, you know, the Northern Ireland institutions worked pretty well. But I think you know, you take a step back and sort of say, well, what was all that about? You know, the kind of extraordinary oratorical powers, you know, if I can put it like that Paisley had. You know, often this very lurid you know, kind of descriptions and the kind of the malevolence of his kind of political presence during those years, not only did so much for loyalist paramilitaries to provide them with a kind of, a moral and political lodestar for what they did. But it's the impact he had on liberal unionism, if I can put it like that, that was just basically destroyed because of his political power, and that's partly because they didn't challenge him effectively. They didn't push back against him effectively. The Ulster Unionist Party is there as the main political vehicle for unionists, a bit bland, a bit middle class. Obviously, that ran the place for 50 years, and then Paisley and the DUP start to catch up on them, and of course, as I say, by 2007 have supplanted them and haven't done till this day. But his impact there is to stop any kind of political personality rising up that challenges him, pushes him back, puts him in a box, and says this is not the way forward for the unionist people. Nobody like that emerged, which is not just a sort of on him. It's actually on them as well for not being stronger, and as I say, being more courageous politically. But it's his kind of direct connection to people who were doing the shooting and were doing the killing. That he provided, and many loyalists would say this. They would say that they pulled into Paisley's oratory and his demonizing of not just Republicans and the IRA, but all Catholics. I mean, he was a blatantly sectarian figure. I mean that's, and again, some of this is to put this mildly. But at the end there, the negotiations of the Good Friday Agreement, when Paisley's kind of haranguing people from outside the buildings, it's many loyalists at this point that have bought into the peace process, that are inside doing the negotiations, and many of them that would be very, very critical of Paisley and the role he played in whipping up their community, and entrenching these hatreds, which ultimately didn't benefit anybody. It didn't benefit poor loyalists, who are some of the most deprived people in Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom, partly as a result of this, that partly of having politicians that don't deliver for them in practical means on housing and jobs and education and all the rest of it, because Paisley's locked in this with this sort of demonic 17th century rhetoric against Catholics. He's not leading his people to a better future. All he's doing is entrenching division. And of course, as I say, he flips at the end and pays a price, because he's removed from the leadership of the Free Presbyterian Church by people who are more hardline than him, which is a thought to conjure with. And he does some good at that point of being able to give Northern Ireland a few decent years where the DUP, Sinn Féin can run an executive. And of course, there's been periodic problems ever since, but there were some decent years there to begin with. And Paisley does deserve credit for that, but he doesn't deserve credit for anything else. As I say, he was an absolutely malignant presence.
At the very end of the book, you presented like a counterfactual. You said, I quote from the book, given the pain and division that partition generated, it remains apostate. Was a different history possible? Permit me to offer this historical counterfactual. What would have happened, for argument's sake, if the 1914 Home Rule Bill, which passed its parliamentary stages but was suspended due to the outbreak of the First World War, had never been fully enacted? Can you unpack that one a little first?
I think it's very clear at any reading of even late Victorian British politics. As I say, this is a period of the zenith of the British Empire, and there are persistent and consistent attempts to deliver home rule for Ireland, which is a different concept than perhaps Irish unity is today. But I mean, you would have ended up with the whole of Ireland running its affairs as perhaps part of the British Empire. But over the course of the 20th century, there would have been, I'm sure, a kind of neat cleaving away, and perhaps there would have been a by the 1920s, 1930s, certainly in that post-war era when so many parts of the British Empire obviously seceded from any any notion of British rule, Ireland would have been part of that, and it would have been the whole of Ireland, not 26 counties of it. So you can see from that period that people like Gladstone in particular, and the Liberals very keen to kind of have this enacted, not least of course because there's enormous pressure from the Irish Parliamentary Party in the House of Commons, obviously under Charles Stewart Parnell for the first period, and then John Redmond having succeeded him. You have a big block of Irish nationalist MPs that are having a huge impact on British politics, and what they want is kind of home rule, and if it had got to a point where that had gone through, and there's various reasons at various points where it didn't, but if it had have gone through and would have had home rule, and there would have been, as I say, 32 county Ireland that's part of the British Empire, but effectively runs its own domestic affairs, and that would have drifted away at some point peacefully during the 20th century, and we would have, I think, now a very different history. And again, it comes down to these points of political courage at crucial moments to sort of say, you can see where this is ultimately going to go. An aerial map of these islands tells you that this is a separate entity, it's a separate place, it's a separate country, it's got its own heritage and history, and we've got very difficult histories together, but ultimately this is what's going to happen. So do everything you can to facilitate that kind of natural evolution of events, and stop trying to kind of stop these things from happening, because ultimately what that does is just ending up creating division and taking us down so many false pathways. And that's what we've had throughout this period. And of course, you might even add that British statesmen have kind of played both sides against the middle, and certainly did in those periods from kind of 1914 through to partition, really, where they're encouraging both sides of a divided political situation to fight in the First World War, and of course both did, and both took horrendous losses and all the rest of it, and both have a kind of a moral purchase on you need to make good, because we've literally made enormous sacrifices for you. And of course what results is partition, where in a very kind of British sense, it's like, can I just have an elegant splitting of the difference? Basically, most Irish nationalists get most of what they want. Unionists get their own protection too. Great, and we're retreating across the Irish Sea. So and then we've ended up, as I say, because of that like kind of lack of courage and that lack of long-term thinking, that we've ended up with this very divided century, which thankfully has now evolved into a place where there is at least an agreement about next steps in the Good Friday Agreement. But the situation in Northern Ireland remains febrile. It remains very difficult, and it absorbs huge amounts of political time from the British government even now, and of course vast amounts of money to kind of prop this place up and make it work. And it doesn't really work, and lots of people bemoan the kind of record and the kind of state of politics, and I always make the point, but everything over the last 27 years since the Good Friday Agreement is infinitely preferable to everything that preceded it. This terrible dysfunctional system that we've got is the best Northern Ireland has ever been governed. It's the best it ever will be governed. It's quite a thought to kind of look at this scratchy coalition between Sinn Féin and the DUP and think, well actually this is progress, this is success. Embrace it as success, because everything else before it was absolutely a blood-soaked disaster. And it's not going to work. It doesn't work brilliantly well, and it's never going to work brilliantly well. Is the reality of it. And and the further we get to a potential border poll and changing Northern Ireland's constitutional status, the more people from the nationalist side of the equation will simply look past Northern Ireland and Stormont, which they are increasingly doing, and saying, so many of our problems that we've got here would be resolved if we were part of United. We were part of the most dynamic small economy in the Western world. That's stacking up, that's created a sovereign wealth fund because it's stacking up all its corporation tax receipts. That it could, that Northern Ireland is required, is just dysfunctional economically. It's not got the scale ever to be a big successful economy. and there's a better future and a better alternative out there. So that's increasingly now where the conversation goes. And as I say, it's that lack of, real sort of long-term political thinking and courageous political leadership from the British side, that is still lacking. I think that's fair to say. It's still not really in great abundance. The Good Friday Agreement was a great success for the Tony Blair government, and all of the other governments have been very glad it's there and have been happy to abide by it. But we're now at the point where there's got to be another leap of imagination in the next few years ahead. And as I say, at the moment, I don't have great hopes looking at Westminster that they're equal to the moment.
I'm always fascinated amongst I guess you're from England, you grew up there, you live there, among like fellow English people. I'm always interested to kind of hear about maybe their extent of awareness and knowledge about the subject, and more so any given that you've studied it and wrote an excellent book and everything, what would be some of the main like misconceptions that you would say like mainland British people and English people would have about Northern Ireland and about the conflict generally?
I think they know very little about it, and of course, given we're now, a good couple of decades on from, the kind of everyday reporting of it, which would have been, dramatic and tragic scenes of bombings and shootings, people trying to make sense of that. I mean, it does absorb, as I say, an enormous amount of time, because there's this stop-start politics that there is in Northern Ireland, and there's periodic crises which require British ministers to kind of helicopter in, leave piles of bags of money, and then helicopter out again, which is pretty much how it works. That I suspect most British people watching this now have very little kind of deep understanding of this place at all, and would regard it as I say, and I don't mean this as a kind of cheap shot, but as a faraway place of which we know and care little. I think that would be the default position of most British people, unless they've got a particular, unless they've got skin in the game, unless they're Irish, orange or green. They probably don't care very much. It's not a place they go to. It's not a place that they've got that any kind of, as I say, deep affinity with. And as I say, unless you're very close to it for family reasons and cultural reasons, and as a result of that, it makes it, when you look at opinion polls of the mood of the British people as opposed to people in Northern Ireland, and it divides into three. It divides into people who think, well, it'd be quite nice to keep Northern Ireland. There's probably about 30 to 35%. There are people who say, yes, let's definitely have a united Ireland, probably 20 to 25%. And then everybody else is like, I don't really understand it. I don't really care. And that's not a kind of insurmountable problem for eventually the British ministers a few years down the line that are going to have to grapple with these questions of Northern Ireland's future. And when that border poll, as I say, when, not if, when it arrives, there will be the thought of what will be the reaction of the British people. Are they going to give us a really hard time about this? Are they massively concerned? Are they going to turn on us? Are they going to take it out on us? And I think it's very evident that won't happen at all. I think what will happen is that British ministers, and it could be the red team, it could be the blue team. They've both got checkered histories on governing Northern Ireland. But I think they recognise that there is a kind of political, moral, and legal obligation in the Good Friday Agreement that they must call a referendum on its constitutional future if it looks likely that people there will vote for it. And we can all agree or disagree on the evidence for that, but the further this goes, the more obvious that will become. And I think what they will say is, look, we have this obligation that we must do this, and then it's up to the people in Northern Ireland what they want to do, and we'll facilitate it. If they want to change, have a united Ireland, we'll facilitate that. If they don't, we'll carry on as we are. And I don't think it will play out in British society in the way that some people think it might do. That this is such a big dramatic change to the structure of the British state that there's a big domestic price to pay for it. I just don't think there is. And I think the closer we get, the more people in Westminster will realise that, and as I say, the more it might help to kind of drag out a bit of political courage at the moment when you know, when a big decision needs to be made. Because, you know, if you know, if we just keep kicking the can down the road forever, and if people think that's tenable, then you know, they're going to be disabused of that notion in you know, short years to come, I think, when something will have to be done. So it's better to start to talk about these things openly, start to talk about the responsibilities that are contingent, particularly on British politicians, as I say, to facilitate change, and start to socialise this issue with the British public that, you know, hitherto is not desperately that interested, which might make it easier to you know, to approach these issues. I suspect it probably will.
Yeah, I agree. I really don't think that I think there'd be a tiny percentage of British people who would actually care, that like they lost a bit of their empire, or that like Britain technically got a bit smaller. I really don't think I really don't think the interest or the care is there amongst British people. On that note, do you think in my lifetime and yours, do you think we'll be seeing a successful border poll and a transition into United Ireland?
I think we will. I mean, it's the most it's the most talked about issue in Irish politics, north and south. You know, these days, everybody's talking about it. Whether that's to say it's not going to happen or not. I mean, I write about this obviously quite a lot because I can just, you know, I can just sense how this is going, really. And the more people talk about it and start to plan for this, the better, because otherwise, as I say, we arrive at a situation where the issue isn't socialized enough, either within Britain, within the north, within the south of Ireland. That you know, so the more talk about it there is, the better. And you know, the chatter about this now is incessant. You know, and you know, whether that's a big intervention the other week from Leo Varadkar, who was arguing that preparations for potential Irish unity down the line should be made in earnest as a core responsibility of the Irish government, which is a very sensible approach, I think. And you know, there's some interesting choreography that needs to take place, which is that there's clearly got to be you know, demonstrable support for this in Northern Ireland, and there's different ways of assessing that. And the most obvious way, it strikes me, is in actual election results, where you can you know, you can code quite easily the parties that are committed to Irish unity, or remaining in the UK. It's fairly obvious, and when you start to tot up those columns, it does start to get very, very close. So that's the kind of trigger point. But then in the south, there's obviously got to be, as I say, it's got to be in the sort of argot of eBay, that the buyer collects. It's got to be willing to collect. So Dublin has got to show absolutely we're on board for this. Now, it is, you know, kind of theoretically, but you know, actually as a, you know, as a more kind of pressing demand. And then what happens then, I think, is that Westminster and Whitehall have a look over and say, if the Irish are willing to take this on, and there'll be a referendum and there will be a clean result, we'll facilitate that. And at that point, I think Westminster and Whitehall move incredibly quickly to say, yeah, there's a legitimate likely change. Let's test that proposition in a referendum. If it goes through, off we go. So I think it's got to be a project that is built on the island of Ireland. I think most obviously, and I think you can start to see we're sort of drifting towards those points, both north and south. And then Westminster lets Ireland do the heavy lifting, and then sweeps in to facilitate it. And I think that will be the kind of how the choreography will look and feel. So you know, the interesting thing to look at is in the late 2020s, we've got 3 sets of elections in Northern Ireland. So these aren't opinion polls. This isn't, you know, disputed opinion polls, because a lot of them are disputed, but these are actual results. So we've now got the next Assembly election. We've got the local elections a year after that, and we're likely to have a Westminster general election in 2029. So 3 elections where I think a reasonable interpretation would be that if, as I say, when you kind of code up the parties committed to Irish unity or a border poll, and the parties that don't want that, when you start to see that electorate tilt, so there is, you know, there are more people that want voting for parties and participating, backing parties that support a border poll. If you can do that in the assembly elections, the local elections, and Westminster, I think the argument then, not to accede to that and have a border poll, becomes very, very thin at that point. Now, we're about to have an Irish general election in November. It's likely, I suspect, from the polling numbers at the moment, that the Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael will carry on running the country for 5 years. But there may then be a dramatic change in 2029. We're going to have a British general election in 2029, and then that period in the kind of early 2030s. If in those three electoral tests, there's a tilt in terms of people's backing a border poll, I think that's the point when you can see we're going to be in that border poll territory in perhaps the 2029 Parliament. So this next few years is going to be very interesting. Now, what's the batting average at the moment? Well, it's very close in the last Assembly elections. There was a small majority tilted in the local. And the local election in Northern Ireland are fascinating because, of course, it's all out elections across the whole of Northern Ireland. Again, when you code up, there is a small majority in the last local elections for parties backing Irish unity. But that's the first time that's happened. Not a lot's been made of that really, but that's a massive kind of inflection point electorally. Westminster tends to be a bit more favourable to the Unionist bloc because you get some Irish nationalists that don't bother voting in Westminster elections. But I think a reasonable test is to sort of say three results. If there's a majority in all three for parties backing a border poll, then there should probably be a border poll. It's very hard to argue against it at that point. So I think in the next over the course of this next decade, up to the kind of mid 2030s, I think we'll see a border poll. I think it's coming.
I'm going to ask, okay, yeah, how did you just to kind of wrap up? How did you come to the point where you were so interested in the topic that you wrote a book? You obviously have an Irish name. But how did your interest get sparked, and then to the point where you produce such an excellent book?
Well, I mean, I think with all Irish people, even people in the Irish diaspora, I mean, this is always there. You're always aware of the history. You're always aware of it's a great way of, I think a lot of Irish people would tend to be very politically switched on anyway, because as I say, so very often history's come and knocked on our doors. So to not be interested in current affairs and the politics of this place would seem very strange. So it's always been there for me. I mean, I studied it at university as well. I was over there during part of the referendum on the Good Friday Agreement with John Hume, which was a fabulous kind of occasion, really, real sense of history being made at that point. So I've written about it pretty much consistently from that point onwards in one form or another. And the thing that's always fascinated me is that particularly in British politics, how few people are interested. I mean, like, unless you, as I say, unless you've got an Irish name, you're not interested. You don't really understand the thing, and you keep one step removed from it, really. But I mean, it's just struck me in the last few years, certainly post Brexit, when you start to look at a lot of the factors that are now very obvious in terms of British politics, that we're drifting consistently to the point when I think there will be a border poll, and I think there'll be a vote for Irish unity. And the thing that really kind of crystallised it for me was not the border poll in Northern Ireland. It was the referendum in Scotland in 2014, which is just 10 years ago, a couple of weeks ago, 10 years on. And sadly, Alex Salmond, the leader of the SNP, former leader of the SNP, had died there tragically a couple of weeks ago. And what was fascinating looking at that was how very close Scotland came to leaving the United Kingdom, which, as the kids say, no one had that on their bingo card. To get to a point where, in a very unequal battle, where you've got plucky Alex Salmond and the Scottish nationalists who came to within 5 points of actually crossing the 50% threshold mark and having an independent Scotland, and the kind of political establishment in Westminster throwing everything at this campaign, and bringing in celebrities and business leaders and everybody else, and massive amounts of money and effort, and the final result being kind of 55 to 45, and my contention is if that referendum campaign had gone on for another couple of weeks, I think the independence campaigners would have crossed the line, and it just struck me at that point in 2014 just how close it came to Scotland leaving, which would have been revolutionary if that would have happened. And support for independence there hasn't really ever dropped back since. It's not consistently over 50%. It's not to say that if there was a referendum there right now that they would win it, but you've got a political system and a country that is virtually equally divided permanently. And if Scotland were to go, I mean, the purpose of Northern Ireland, given the kind of connections to Scotland, would seem, I think, rather strange. So it just struck me again how this crept up on Westminster. They panicked. They couldn't believe how close it was. And then, of course, as soon as it's over, they kind of drift away again and aren't too bothered. And if that can happen in Scotland, then that can happen in Northern Ireland, given, of course, the Good Friday Agreement legally guarantees that there must be a referendum if it looks likely that people there would vote for change. So, for the SNP government in Scotland trying to get Westminster to give it another go, and Westminster saying you're not having another go, they don't have a mechanism to force Westminster to kind of give ground. But in Northern Ireland, there is a legal mechanism. And just as Scotland, I think, is regarded as a huge asset worth keeping in the UK, Northern Ireland isn't. It's not an asset in terms of its economic value, its strategic value, and the kind of bonds and connections that are so important in binding disparate places into a single state. Those are very loose and limited these days, and it's a point lots of people have made. So for all those reasons, as I say, it's incumbent on the British government to call that vote in due course. It will be held, and Northern Ireland, I think we can see, will vote to go to United Ireland. Partly because you're not going to convince many Ian Paisley supporters that this is a good thing, and you're not going to convince many Sinn Féin supporters to stay. Well, there are people in the middle ground, lots of people from a kind of liberal Protestant unionist background, who can say, if politics is what I want, it's equally about what I can live with. And I think a lot of people in Northern Ireland will start to say, we've been talking about this for such a long time now. It's always been there as a prospect. We're getting towards that point. If this is to happen, it's not the end of the world, because we join into a state that is, as I say, one of the most dynamic economic entities in the Western world. Actually, we can get a lot out of this. It can be good for prosperity and jobs and all the rest of it. So if I can see it in those terms, then I can live with it. And I think that's a very, very powerful supplementary point to all this, where a referendum is ultimately this side or that side, but actually there are lots of people who can approach things pragmatically and sort of say, what are the actual issues involved? If I can agree with those, then although I started over here, I can end up over there. And I think that's where the game is at the moment over the next 5 years, is being able to flesh out what the proposition is. And I think there's a lot of work to do there, but as I say, when Ireland is creating a sovereign wealth fund to stack up its enormous corporation tax receipts, there's a lot to play with in terms of how we make Northern Ireland as part of a broader Irish new state, how we make that work.
Okay, let's say this border poll does happen, and it kind of looks likely that it'll result in United Ireland. Do you think amongst the existing loyalist paramilitaries, who, to be fair, I think it's fair to say the majority are probably kind of nothing more than kind of drug dealers or drug dealer taxers. Do you think amongst them there would be like a significant enough like desire to and willingness to use violence to stop it happening? And on the other side, do you think if it were to happen that there would be enough there would be enough people within the Catholic community who would use this opportunity to get like revenge, as they see it, against loyalists and enact violence on which has always been a very legitimate fear for the loyalists, in that they will get like sold out, as they see it, and then they just get left being a very significant minority in a country of mainly Catholics.
I think there's a lot to do. I think that part of it is you know, that kind of the kind of threat of that, you know, can't be allowed to derail, you know, a wider political project. I mean, you know, it would be absurd if we were to sort of say, oh, well, look, there are some loyalists that aren't going to be happy, and they may go back to the bomb and the bullet and all the rest of it. So let's not do this. I mean, you know, that can't be allowed to kind of have any sway, I think. And I think you know, creditably, there are people, even, you know, even from within loyalism, that when they've been asked this question, if there's a vote, would you abide by it, have said, yeah, at that point I have to. You know, because at that point you're either a Democrat or you're not a Democrat. And if you're not a Democrat, then what is it that you are then? And should we pivot our society around you? I mean, that would be kind of extraordinary. And of course, you know, you don't want to sort of say, well, you know, there are security and policing measures to kind of crack down. But of course, that is the case. You know, that would happen. But I think look, I think there's a very big constructive offer, particularly to lots of working class loyalists who, you know, who bemoan their lot, and I'd agree with them. I'd absolutely agree with them, because, you know, their mainstream unionist politicians have let them down. You know, you know, people go out and vote for the DUP or the Ulster Unionist Party. They don't deliver for working class loyalists. They never have done. And there can be a big generous offer that sort of says, look, you know, we're going to connect here with, as I say, one of the fastest growing economies in the Western world, some where the economic fundamentals in Ireland are so strong and powerful that you can create something really good and really new. And just as you know, the impact of the South would feed very positively into the North. So the North has something to offer too, which is not often something that's appreciated really. But you know, a lot of the problems of the Southern economy are equal and opposite to the problems of the Northern economy. So the Southern economy is overheating; it's sucking in lots of immigration, which is causing its own problems because it's you know, its economy needs, you know, migrant workers partly. Well, you know, you've got Northern Ireland up the road with very high levels of kind of structural worklessness, which would, you know, a ready-made kind of workforce, lots of great assets, lots of infrastructure and social spending that have taken place, particularly since the end of the Troubles. You know, the place is not in bad fettle. You know, if this was a used car, you'd say I've got a pretty good bargain here, because this thing integrates very well into this wider new settlement. And you know, I suspect the benefits of unity economically will be felt very, very quickly, particularly in the North. And you know, the studies that have shown that, you know, that in terms of inward investment, the North would benefit massively disproportionately, because there will be a lot of catch-up potential that it's got. So as I say, I think there'll be a lot of people looking at this quite rationally that would sort of say, whether you politically, emotionally want to see United Ireland, economically, you know, the case is unanswerable. I mean, of course Northern Ireland would benefit hugely, and painting this in, you know, in a kind of perhaps more poetic way, particularly for working class loyalists, to again say, look, you know, whatever guarantees culturally you want, they can be respected in this United Ireland. There's nobody coming to rub your noses in it. Most people are just glad that this kind of psychodrama has ended at this point, and we want to make this place work, and you're part of it, so we want you to contribute in making that work as well. And I think economic success is a great way of resolving political tensions. If you've got a decent job, you know, you've got some money in your pocket, you've got a you know, better house and all the rest of it. You don't want to put all that at risk, standing on the street of a night, you know, firebombing. Who are you firebombing at this point? Because it's the British government that's facilitated your change of constitutional status, and it's the people in this place that have voted for it. And you know, if you won't accept that, then you put yourself in a very, very strange position where no one will have any sympathy for you. And you know, ultimately, what I think tends to happen with, you know, with a lot of kind of talk about this is that, you know, people sense, I might not like it, but I can live with it. And I think that's going to be a very important kind of dimension to all of this. And it's the mistake going all the way back that unionists made, and you know, even to this current day, where if they wanted or still want Northern Ireland to exist, they've got to get a big chunk of the Catholic nationalist Republican community to acquiesce. and that means being nice to them. And it means on issues like Irish language, street signs in Belfast. Yeah, no bother. If you want that, great, fine. We can live with that, because if you feel more acclimatized to being here, and the relationship is less antagonistic between political unionism and the nationalist community, great, because that's going to potentially put some years on Northern Ireland. But even still, they still can't do it. Just as at the start of Northern, they should have created a more equitable, built a more equitable society, not been so insular and corrupt in rewarding their people and penalising the Catholics. If they'd have run this place well, perhaps Northern Ireland have got deeper roots. Perhaps it wouldn't be in this permanent kind of antechamber. As I say, betwixt and between being part of the UK and being part of United Ireland. Perhaps more Catholics would have sort of said, I can see the benefits and I'm quite happy to leave things as they are. But that hasn't happened because of all those mistakes that have been made. So it's incumbent on United Islanders of whatever stripe not to make that same mistake, to be generous and to be outward and to be open and to be straightforward as well. And to sort of say, a lot of unions won't get involved in the conversation. Partly, well, they wouldn't be unionists if they did. So I kind of understand that. But the chair is there. Come and say what it is you want and you value. But what we can tell you is, on the economic front, this is how much this place will benefit from being part, as I say, of this very, very dynamic, economy. Which and you can never say never in politics, and there may be storms ahead and all the rest of it. But the Irish economy and its fundamentals are in a very, very good place. And Northern Ireland, as part of that, would benefit enormously. And I think that would assuage a lot of opinion from the unionist community amongst people who perhaps conceptually don't want to see any change. But I think if the lived reality is, actually, this is not so bad, I think would go a long way to kind of calming things down.
I was going to say the actual principle of having United Ireland, that motivation, it would probably really only properly animate like a small percentage of people there. There's plenty who do care about like the principle of it, but for most, like if they're living like a good life and they have their kind of material needs met and they're not being discriminated, they really, I don't think people would be willing to like get up and go take political action or even more to achieve United Ireland just based on the principle of there's plenty that would, but I don't think I think for most it would be more like kind of material conditions and so on.
Yeah.
So just to wrap it up, excellent book. Really enjoyed it. Like I said, the taking the broad view, because I usually zoom in, but it's very good to zoom out and get like a perspective on it. Very interesting. You've written a book before about Irish reunification. I haven't read
Yes.
it. Do you plan the future on turning your attention in terms of writing a book to the subject again, or any particular aspect of the Ireland or the Troubles or anything?
Yeah, I've got a few ideas for. I'm working on another book at the moment about political mavericks, with a more of through British politics really, but some of those are Irish characters too. So I'm writing about that, but then I'm going to return to looking at I think some of the issues around unionism and some of the mistakes that have been made. I'm quite interested in that. But yeah, I did write about. My other book is United Ireland: Why Unification is Inevitable and How It Will Come About, which hopefully sort of says the book cover kind of tells you what it's about. But I wrote the first edition of that in the end of 2016, just as Brexit had happened. And I had to do some hasty rewriting because no one expected Brexit to happen. That was a rude shock. And then there's ripples out from Brexit, which you couldn't really foresee at that point. So I got the first edition out, and then I updated it in 2022 when it was a bit more obvious about again some of the impacts that Brexit has had and will continue to have in terms of how that impacts Northern Ireland differently than the rest of the UK. And of course, we've had several years of just kind of interminable problems about backstops and protocols and Windsor agreements and all the rest of it. But again, it sort of says the residue of that, I think, in Westminster is this place is more trouble than it's worth. and we're getting bent out of shape. Even our Brexit's got bent out of shape for a place of 1.9 million people, which, you know, who, as I say repeatedly, we know and care little about. You know, so you know, I can foresee, if the circumstances were right, you know, a Conservative government calling a referendum on Northern Ireland's constitutional status, and, you know, be as bold as that about it. And some people would blanch at the prospect of the Tories doing that, but I could well see that happening, to be honest, especially after their experience of how Northern Irelanders kind of got in the way of their Brexit.
So, sorry, you might have misspoke. You said 9 million. I think I heard 9. You're
Sorry,
not.
sorry, 1.9 million.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's you know, it's a lot of political energy and an awful lot of public cash spent on a place of just, you know, the size of a large English county, one single county, basically.
Ironically, one of the one of the aims of the IRA commercial bombing campaign was kind of to make the place so like much of a pain in the ass and financial fucking black hole that it wouldn't be worth it. So ironically, that's kind of playing out in a different way.
Yeah, that's quite a symmetry there, absolutely, and I think there's a lot of Tory MPs that have probably muttered that, you know, the amount of energy and angst that's over the last few years that's gone into trying to secure Brexit, while at the same time not have a hard border on the island of Ireland, which would have created all kinds of symbolic and very practical problems, has probably got a lot of them to think, you know, what's the point, you know, so again, you know, it's a place that impacts cumulatively on British politics, and with each impact, I think there's probably fewer and fewer people in Westminster in the system we have here that, from first principles, think that Northern Ireland as part of the UK is desirable or a good long-term bet. I think the number of people that think that becomes fewer and fewer with each parliament.
Thank you so much for joining me. Really enjoyed taking like a broader zoom out look at the topic that I usually focus more into specific things. Okay, just as a final, the name of the book, and if you could, I guess we spent like nearly an hour and a half talking about it, but if you give like a few lines on like how you would describe what your book is about.
So the book is What a Bloody Awful Country: Northern Ireland's Century of Division. There it is. Yes, and it's written with an eye on the centenary, of course, in 1921, which partly because of COVID just came and went, and even I was quite surprised at just the lack of general interest, you know, in terms of that very important anniversary. You know, it kind of just came and went, and that was it. But it's my canter through the 100 years of what I think is a very painful, very troubled history with lots of missteps and lots of points where, as I say, you know, more political courage at the right points could have led us on a very different path, but they didn't, unfortunately.
Thank you again for joining me. Been a pleasure.
Delighted.
Nice one, Kev.
All the best.